When did people first start using musical instruments and start singing?
Very, very interested in where music comes from and why music even exists in the first place. And so then if you kind of distill that down and break that down right back to our early evolution, that's where you get instruments like the conch. And I'm kind of just fascinated by that instinct that we had to pick up these instruments and use them as tools of creative expression.
That's what we're getting into today on this special episode of The World, the Universe and Us, all about the origin of music and the evolution of creativity. Can't help smiling at that.
No, how could we not?
I'm Dr. Rowan Hooper.
And I'm Dr. Penny Sarchet. And our very special guest this week is the musician Steve Pretty. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you very much. A musician in a New Scientist studio.
We love it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we have another flourish?
A little flourish? Yeah. Okay, we'll see. I'll give you a little... Well, I'll tell you what. I'll do a little fanfare and I'll explain why in a bit. There we go.
What? Explain why now.
Explain why. Well, it's all to do with one of the reasons that I'm here, which is that I brought some shells in, and I'm a trumpet player, as you can tell, and I'm very, very interested in where music comes from and why music even exists in the first place. But as a trumpet player, I've become very obsessed with playing conch shells. It's sort of my midlife crisis. Some people buy Ferraris. I've got really into playing shells. I should actually say, especially as I'm on the New Scientist podcast, that it's not just conch shells, it's all sorts of different varieties of shells, frog shells, triton shells, conch shells.
Okay.
But they work in a very fundamentally similar way, the same way really as a trumpet.
Okay.
So that little fanfare I just played there, I didn't put my fingers down at all, I didn't play any, I didn't push my valves down.
Yeah.
And this is the same way that all these instruments work as well.
Okay, well, so that is, we want to get onto the origin and the evolution of music. And we always think, well, that's really hard to study because songs don't fossilise. But even so, there are aspects that we can study. We know that chimps physically can't sing. My wife says I also can't physically sing. So that means we must know the ability to sing evolved, after that common ancestor split from chimps, right?
Yes, and there are fossils suggesting that some hominins may have had the anatomy to control their voice around 1 million years ago. So that kind of gives us a hint about when we could have maybe gained that ability.
But narrowing it down any further is a bit more difficult. But with instruments, it is more. They do fossilise, right? So you get these bone flutes about 40,000 years old or so. So we know we can put a number on that. But then, as you say, we've got conches, and that's what we want to talk about. So let's hear a conch first.
Yeah, you want to hear a conch? Okay,
yeah.
so I've brought I've brought 3 in, but let me just get this nice big one first. So this is actually a triton shell, very, very beautiful shell. And let me play it for you. I'm going to back off the mic because it is loud.
Wow.
But just going back to what we were saying just now about the way I played the fanfare. In fact, we're recording this just near to Remembrance Sunday, and of course those fanfares are played on bugles traditionally, the last post, and that is a trumpet without any valves. And conches and other brass instruments work in exactly the same way, which is that we're working with the resonance of the instrument in order to be able to create different notes from that same mouthpiece, the same shell. And so I can get more notes. I can essentially play a fanfare on a conch in the same way.
I've never understood how, like those what do you call it?
Bugles,
bugles. Yeah. How you get so many different notes? How
do
you?
Let me show you on this conch, right? So I go again.
So what are you doing there?
So I'm speeding up the air. So of course, all sound is vibrating air, and what I'm doing is speeding up the air column, speeding up the vibrations of the air, using a combination of air pressure and vibrating lips. So slightly more sort of tension in my face, my embouchure it's called. Yeah. And that basically, what then happens, you can hear that it suddenly locks into a note. So I sort of missed it the first time. So it's not there. It's, and so those are the kind of fundamental resonant properties of the shell, and so that exactly the same on the trumpet or any other brass instrument. So. So the trumpet is just a piece of plumbing that's especially designed to accentuate those bits of the physics of a natural instrument like this.
Right.
You can hear that those two notes are not necessarily very in tune, that the octave of these are not quite there. But yeah, there's then these other tones that I can keep going up. And the reason that you can play lots of notes on a bugle or on kind of early trumpets is that you're playing, as you get higher, the notes get closer together, so that the kind of overtone series gets closer together, and that means that you can then essentially, by the top, it's easy to demonstrate on the trumpet, you can play a whole scale with no valves at all, with no buttons at all. So you can hear that's a fifth, a musical fifth, that's a fourth, and then third. And once we get up to here, you can start playing an entire scale with no valves at all. So they get bigger the lower you are and smaller the higher you are. So an easier way to think about this might be on a guitar where the frets are very close together, the higher up the note you go, or a grand piano where you've got this sort of exponentially longer bass end than you have the high end. This big cut, cut off.
I see.
And so it's that same principle essentially.
This message is sponsored by Vive Healthcare. In the global battle against HIV, science has given us incredible treatments that allow people with HIV to live long, healthy lives. Yet in many places, the stigma surrounding HIV is still so powerful that the fear of being discovered can outweigh the need for life-saving therapy. This single issue is one of the biggest reasons the United Nations goal of ending the HIV epidemic by 2030 is currently under threat. But groundbreaking, patient-centred research from Vive Healthcare is helping to solve this problem. This company is pioneering the next generation of longer-acting, innovative therapies so that no person living with HIV is left behind. A new feature article from New Scientist CoLab explains the science behind these new therapies and features exclusive insights from lead researchers at Vive. If you want to understand the science that offers hope for ending the HIV epidemic, you need to read this story. Find it at newscientist.com/VIIV. We should say that Steve is not best known for being a conch player.
Not yet, anyway. Still time.
Well, we haven't mentioned. We want to mention the brilliant Hackney Colliery Band. Steve's band leader of them. He's also got a great podcast called Steve Pretty on the origin of the pieces. But yeah, we want to get into the evolution of music, and you've got some gadgetry to get into with that, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. I mean, one of the reasons I think I'm so obsessed with the evolution of music is it's a very strange thing to do with your life, making sort of weird noises out of bits of plumbing, or then electronic toys or whatever else. It's I remember when my kids started nursery, and I would go in and I think I would be slightly embarrassed to have to talk about what I did for a living, because there'd be people here.
I'm sure it's much more interesting than what most people do.
I mean, I'm very, very lucky. I'm extremely lucky, and I love it. And I couldn't imagine doing anything else now. But it is a very strange way to spend your time making silly noises in a shed, basically, or in front of people. And I've always been obsessed with why that is. And much as I love lyrics and music with lyrics, I'm particularly interested in kind of abstract music. In other words, music without words put to it. And so then if you kind of distill that down and break that down right back to our early evolution, that's where you get instruments like the conch or again the flutes you mentioned. And I'm kind of just fascinated by that instinct that we had to pick up these instruments and use them as tools of creative expression. Because and I think particularly what I find fascinating is the iterative process that needs in order to create something. So you can't just pick up a shell and play it. You have to. So what I do sometimes as part of my live shows is I have a hacksaw and a shell, because I have a whole load of shells at home. I have a whole rack of them, and I cut the end. I make the shell live on stage and then play it. It's not a complicated process, and obviously back in the day that would have been done with a flint or whatever else. But it does. You can't just pick it up and play it. You do need to do some work to it, and of course that presumably would have taken generations to work out. And then that kind of that evolution, that same iterative process applies right the way through to the trumpet and everything else that we think of as music now.
You mentioned kids there, and I always think when you look at young children, the joy that they get from music, it's hard not to think, well, there's something in us that completely sort of predisposes us to really get something that feels transcendent from musical expression.
Exactly. And also, I think that I'm also fascinated, I talk about it a lot on the podcast, about the different uses of music and the different functions that music has, whether it's ceremonial or whether it's as just a purely, messenger sort of, to sending messages in long distances. And again, coming back to the conches, one of the reasons, the more I looked into these kind of primitive instruments, the more I found that they were used all over the world, in lots of different ways. A lot of the ways that we use music now. So they're used as communication. They're used in ceremonial instruments.
Yeah.
They're associated with all sorts of different things, dancing even in some places. And so there's something just having that shell, having that thing that nature produces, and that we as humans then adapt into a creative tool. And every iteration that we go through, we find a new tool of creative expression. And humans have this incredibly complicated emotional lives, and these tools of creative expression are there to get out our feelings, essentially.
I imagine that William Golding must have heard about this when he put the conch in Lord of the Flies, and we were talking about this, the one that Ralph and Piggy used. So but that's the first I'd heard of it, and all this history and culture of conch playing, I've never heard of that before, but it's incredible, isn't it?
It's really interesting. And so I've spent quite a lot of time in India over the years, and particularly with Tibetans, and the conch is a very important ceremonial instrument in Tibet. Now you think, where is Tibet?
How do they get
exactly? It's landlocked, right?
There.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so they're incredibly important to Tibetan Buddhism. They're very, very important in Hinduism. They're obviously still used in the Pacific a lot, but similarly in Europe and America. So they're sort of found all over the world and used in a similar kind of way, but again with different uses of music. So sometimes it's ceremonial, sometimes it's for communication, and so there's something sort of really pure about that. And that kind of iterative process, the ultimate expression of that, if you don't mind me explaining for a second, is this, I think. And this is just to describe it, it's a white plastic conch. This is a 3D printed shell. And I find it, even though it essentially sounds the same as a regular conch, there's something really fascinating about that iterative process that starts from our ancient ancestors picking up a shell. Yeah. And now eccentric people like me, or this bloke in Germany who made this one, laser scanning them, having to do all of this very, very high technologically advanced stuff to make these instruments, and then printing them and iterating them. And I just play it, and it sounds similar. So it's a similar idea, right? And again, that overtone, the series that I was talking about comes through. It's the same sort of idea there. It's something that I find really fascinating. And I think one of the things about shell instruments is that they have this enormous sound. We're in a very small kind of podcast studio now, and so although it does fill the room with sound, it's deliberately a very sonically dead room, right? And so it's a good sound, but it doesn't really kind of move you, right? It's just a loud sound. I was lucky enough to spend a few hours overnight in the Natural History Museum in the Hinsey Hall, where I recorded a load of these, and some in particular. In fact, this tiny one I've brought as well, I think it was this one, I played one note on this. I played this note, just that little note, and the Hinsey Hall, for some reason, and the resonance of that hall and that note, just the reverb was extraordinary, and made the person I was with cry just from that one note speaking. That, and there's something really, really interesting about where these instruments are played.
So we've just done a feature at New Scientist on Acoustics, and in that there's talk of a 3,000-year-old temple or performance space in the Andes, I think, and apparently it has the exact resonant frequency as the conches that have been discovered there in excavations. So what would that have mean? We talk about it sort of enhances the sensory experience, but what would that feel like? Would it be reverb? reverb.
Yeah, essentially. So it's reverb, but rooms have different kind of standing waves where they the particular frequencies resonate particularly well. So I'm going to a classical concert tonight at the Royal Festival Hall. Those spaces are, of course, designed for orchestral music, and they work incredibly well for that. They don't work so well, and I've played there with jazz projects and things. It's cool. It works okay, but it's not what they're designed for, and so for example, church gigs, as someone who plays music that often has loud drums in it, playing in a church can be quite challenging because everything gets muddied up. Whereas the choral music is very much designed to be sung in a church, and in fact, they kind of co-evolved, if you don't mind me using the word of evolved in that way. Like they co-evolved. The music that people were writing for churches were written for those spaces, and the churches were designed for that, and so on.
Wow.
And so they kind of these different approaches to our kind of sonic perception evolved together. So the technology of the instruments and technology of the rooms. So one of the things I do live a lot, and in fact I'm just working on an album of this stuff as well, is to try and kind of recreate that sense of the sublime, I suppose, that sense of sort of that I think, of course, it's all conjecture, but that our ancient ancestors might have felt when they were in these very resonant spaces. There's some other interesting examples of caves where the bouncing sound waves off the wall form a kind of rhythm, right?
Yeah.
So they bounce off one wall and then that bounces off on the other, and that
little
creates
rave going
exactly,
on.
Exactly. But when I'm playing these things in here or in festivals or wherever, you can't create that. You can't create that naturally.
You can with this.
Exactly. So that's why I have some electronic toys in front of me. But actually, it sort of feels like these ancient instruments and modern instruments are very different. But I see them as part of the same continuum. Yeah. Because here we're manipulating like what nature's given us with a shell, and here we're manipulating basically electrons or ones and zeros, and it's a similar principle where we're trying to sort of bend.
Well, let's have a go.
Let's have a little go.
It's funny because when you were talking about it at first, I was thinking of it as a religious kind of experience that you get, and like you talked about your friend crying and being so moved, but then there is the party. Function,
the release, the sort of group bonding.
And we'll perhaps get onto this, but like the social cohesion hypothesis for music, like bringing everyone together in a common purpose.
Well, I mean, I'm a great believer in that we don't need to choose one of the reasons that music evolved. And again, I think it speaks to the different uses we have of music, even now, whether it's dancing or whether it's ceremonial music or even like elevator music, or these all have different functions. And I find it. And actually, one of the things I found about doing this stuff, these is I kind of think of them as sound baths rather than conventional gigs. And so at festivals, when I've been doing it, people are lying down, and it's a sort of like a meditation, really.
Yeah,
which is very different
at a festival, don't you? Yeah, you really need it.
Well, that's the thing. But it's the opposite of what I would normally want from a festival gig. My audience lying down, but actually for this, it's really nice. And the project is called Shellectronica. There's a website, shellectronica.com, where you can hear some more of this. But let me see if I can get a little, just very mini version of it going now.
Have you just made this up? Or you've just jammed this up yourself? Yeah, that's brilliant.
Yeah, so it's. I mean, again, you can kind of take it in all sorts of directions, and sometimes. Sometimes I do something a bit more rhythmic. When I've done them at festivals, again, what I tend to do is do it over an hour. And just kind of feel how it feels in the room, and sort of take people, because it can get quite intense. Other times it can be.
Then.
That's the thing. I was trying to do a very condensed version, but it can suddenly get.
And so, just to explain what was happening, was it sampling little sections of it and then playing it back?
Yeah, exactly. And so everything. What I talk about with the shell electronica is everything you're hearing is coming from the shells, but it's then being manipulated in various ways. So repitched. Delayed and filtered and
Were you getting some microtone beatings in there by overlaying very similar tones? It sounds like they're sort of bouncing around.
Exactly that.
Amazing.
Yeah, exactly that. So that is where for those who can't see, I have this large Triton shell, and I can, like a French horn player, I can bend the notes down. So. And so let me just very quickly. See if I can demonstrate that microtone beating thing, because it's quite interesting.
What is microtone beating?
So you often learn about it from gamelan. You have all of these, I can't remember what they're called, but all the constituent parts, they can be really close together, a quarter of a tone out.
Okay.
And when you're playing them that close, the physics of the sound waves, they sort of interact and sound like a reverb in itself. Is that fair, Steve?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So if we think of one tone, so if I just record one tone, and let's see if we can do this live. Just turn this up a bit. Okay, and then what I can probably try and do, if I just turn this up a bit, is if I then do this. So it's a little bit trickier to hear there because there's various other things set up. But it's even just on the pure sound of the shell itself. If you've got two instruments playing very close together, again, just the maths of the two sound waves basically overlap in a really interesting way and kind of pulse, right?
Yeah. So you're interested in this, obviously, as a musician, but also more widely. What can studying instruments like this tell us about the origins of creativity more generally?
It's a really good question. I mean, I should say I'm not a scientific expert on this, so it's more reading I've done and thinking I've done myself about it rather than deep scientific research. But I think there's something that again feels extremely pure about what music can do that a lot of other things that humans do can't do in the same way. And I think there's something about human emotions being very very complicated, and I always think when people talk about major and minor, happy, sad, it's much more complicated than that. And music, and of course that's just Western major and minor. That's a very simplistic view of what music is, full stop. And so once you get into the nuances of different ways that people use music, the different tools that people use to make music, we were just talking about gamelan from Indonesia, and that's a completely different conception of how music works. And I think the point of it is the same, which is to express something that we can't necessarily articulate so well in words. And I think there's another thing that often gets said about music being a universal language, which I always take slight issue with. I think there's, on one level it is, because there is music in every culture that we've ever come across or studied. But what the music is incredibly different. So something I cover a lot on my podcast is the different again, the different uses of music, but the different ways that people approach making music. I studied just for a couple of weeks a bit of tabla drums in India some years ago, and the way that they approach, for example, rhythm is so fundamentally different to how we think about it in Western classical theory, for example. They're both incredibly powerful, and they both have an amazing value, but they're just different approaches.
Yeah. When you said how music can express feelings better than words or something like that, it makes me think of language and whether music came first before language.
Yeah, so there's these sort of two, broadly speaking, there's these, as far as I understand it, these two theories, one of which is the Steven Pinker kind of hypothesis, which is Steven Pinker called it music auditory cheesecake. Which is, it's nice to have, but it's not really necessary. And of course, that offended musicians. Everything. But I'm very happy if that is true. Obviously, you know, I'm a rationalist. I'm very happy to believe that. But I think there's another theory, which is quite widely discussed, where actually there's an argument that music kind of evolved before language, or at least as part of language, and that they're very, very, very closely linked. And so that if you think of motherese, it's called, I think, when people talk to babies, like, la, 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 you know, like that sort of thing. That is a very sort of primal, elemental thing that is very, very close to music. If you think about the tonal qualities of how we talk to young kids, but also then again, if we think about kids. So I've just on my podcast. I've just done an episode where I talk about my daughter, who, when I recorded it at the time, was 2.5, and she was singing a song, improvising a song. I'd love to say that was because she's a musical genius, but it's not. She was on the sofa, and she was singing about what she was doing at the time, and that was farting on the sofa. She was farting on the sofa. She was singing a song about farting on the sofa, and improvising this song away. But what happens, I think, over time as we get older, is that we stop thinking about ourselves as kind of creative musicians. So when you're a young kid, you don't separate yourself out from the creation process of music and the listening process of music. And something that I'm really, really passionate about in all my live shows and my I work with the astronomer Chris Lintott as well. We're doing a little talk coming up called Universe of Music, and we talk about it a bit there as well, which is that music's for everyone, right? And including making music. And again, these days we've never had better tools to just be able to play around with music in a way. One other thing I did in my podcast recently was record a fire pit when we were camping on holiday. This lovely tone to this metal fire pit, and then just on an app on my phone, and then played around, turned that into music. And my point there is that we mess around with photos and videos, filters or whatever all the time. We don't do the same with sound, and we can. There's incredible. We've never had better resources to be able to do that, and so it feels if we can reconnect that sense of kind of creativity with our modern lives now, which is where electronics and where all of the resources we've got come in, I think.
You mentioned the Chris Lintott show you're doing, and that's about is that about how music overlaps with science?
Yeah, so we've done it on and off for a few years. It's called Universe of Music, and we're doing a few little
dates. Is he a musician as well? Or?
No, he's
an astronomer.
He's an astronomer. Yeah. No, and he loves music. Absolutely loves music. We kind of show got together because of our shared love of New Orleans music. Yeah, Chris spent a lot of time in New Orleans, and so have I. Yeah, and so that's how we connected. Right? Yeah. And Chris was a bit of a fan of my band, and I'm a fan of his. And we sort of just realised that I love astronomy. He loves music. And so we sort of talk about that. We talk about some of the overlaps. But really, fundamentally, I think what's so interesting about that show and a lot of the stuff that I do with early, shells and early music is really what it is it's a search for meaning, right? Like we were these sort of thinking beings in the seemingly unthinking universe. And whether we're looking up at the stars and using technology to find what our place is in the universe, or whether we're trying to find what our emotional place is in the universe, that's kind of the point of commonality with Chris and I, and it runs through a lot of the work that I do as well, I think.
We better leave it there. But thanks so much for coming in, Steve. Go to Shell Electronica. Shellectronica.com. You can see more on there about Steve and his conches, and the podcast is Steve Pretty on the origin of the pieces. Definitely check that out as well.
And shall we play the episode out with a bit more on the Triton shell?
Oh, sure.
Great. Thanks for listening to this special episode of The World, the Universe and Us. We'll see you next week. Bye for now.
Bye. If you've enjoyed today's episode and want to continue feeding your curiosity, then it's worth checking out our Black Friday sale, which has just gone live. Get 50% off our annual subscription price to New Scientist. Gain unlimited digital access to all our latest reporting and premium articles, available on our app, website and print. Visit newscientist.com/sale and unlock a deeper understanding of our world.